Perhaps cliché, but nothing quite changes your entire world like becoming a parent. And in addition to the great things like seeing your children grow and experiencing a richer and fuller appreciation of dad jokes, there are stressful times as well, and that's fair enough. Some new parents make the adjustment better than others. You sleep when the baby sleeps, you go out a little less, you watch more Coco Melon and less True Detective. Your time is no longer your own. Or, alternatively, maybe you get other people to do those things. Maybe you buy an old school building outside of New York City and form a commune, so the job of actually raising your child is now the responsibility of who drew the short straw that week. The Helicon Home Colony of Englewood, New Jersey. Welcome to Words and Coffee, where we talk interesting history about the Garden State and showcase a bag of small batch roasted goodness. Today's brew is Morning Trails from Jolts for Colts. And the history is Upton Sinclair's commune. Let's get to it. Meet Upton Sinclair, an American socialist, perhaps best known for his novel The Jungle. For those of you who skipped 10th grade English class, the short version is that it's a scathing critique of, among other things, turn-of-the-century practices in the meatpacking industry. To be fair, the focus on this particular element was not Sinclair's original intent. He wanted to showcase the plight of immigrant workers, but instead, people latched on to the food safety aspects because that's gross. He may not have liked it, but he still cashed the checks. Incidentally, this led directly to the formation of the FDA, and notably, the reason New Jerseyans fight over Taylor ham versus pork roll today. We're not off to a great start. Sinclair wrote The Jungle following several months of undercover work in Chicago's meatpacking industry. Now, Sinclair had been a writer of some success for the decade or so leading up to this point, but some might note the timing of this decision, a couple years after the birth of his first child. Oh, wow, the kid kept me up all night. Uh, honey, I just remembered. I need to spend a couple months in Chicago. It's totally for work. Following his undercover fact-finding mission, Sinclair would spend most of the next 3 years living with his first wife, Meta, and son David at a secluded farm outside of Princeton. Now, frankly, that's my idea of heaven, but Upton went a bit COVID lockdown stir-crazy. He started referring to himself as Thyrsis and was generally an unhappy man. Now, with this context in mind, fast forward to '06, and suddenly he's rich and famous following the publication of The Jungle. What to do with his newfound financial security? Does he A. spend more time with his son and mend the strained relationship with his wife? Or B. buy an old schoolhouse, form a commune so that he can get his wife off his back and offload the job of raising his kid to those, quote, more suited to the task? Ahem. Sinclair was quite upfront and clear about his feelings on the subject that, quote, no one should be happy in a backward way of life, end quote. Thus, he went to great lengths to make sure he didn't have to raise his own kid, and so endeavored to build his utopian progressive vision of the future. And he found it in Jersey. In June of 1906, Sinclair wrote 2 articles advertising to people who might want to take part in this experiment. The plan was this. Sinclair would purchase a 400-acre lot, which would be divided into 100 homes, and each family would do the whole from each according to their ability thing. The commune would be entirely self-sufficient, with a farm for dairy, meat, and vegetables, and even its own power generation. He laid out plans for communal cooking and cooperative care for children. This facility would be state-of-the-art, with a scientifically constructed kitchen, a lavish dining hall, and plenty of machines. Boy, all that sounds great. If it happened that way. Which it didn't. But we'll get to that, don't you worry. The articles got the attention of a respectable pool of candidate residents, and so Sinclair began to vet them for the right credentials. All right, say you're a middle-aged professional in the early aughts. Life is good, marriage, kids. But gee, wouldn't it be nice if you had maybe just a little bit more time for your creative pursuits? Well, friend, you are in luck. The Helicon home is the right place for you, provided that you are of middle-class income, preferably an author, teacher, musician, or other professional, and most certainly not Black, Asian, or Jewish. Upton Sinclair, ladies and gentlemen. Even after getting acceptable candidates to buy into this enterprise, Sinclair could only afford a 10-acre lot, which included the former Helicon School for Boys, a 3-story structure of luxurious construction and an hour's commute from the city, by '06 methods of transport. Estimates vary since there were few full-time residents, but about 46 adults and 15 children called Helicon Hall home for its short existence. So what was it like living there? It was arranged with 35 dormitories, each with an interior balcony around a common central atrium, which featured a large 4-sided fireplace. Amenities included an indoor pool, tennis court, and bowling alley. Evenings in the central atrium hosted frequent group readings, lectures, and animated debates. However, private rooms were off limits without an invitation, so you could have privacy when you wanted it and access to friends when you wanted it. Children were largely encouraged towards self-sufficiently, having a separate area to themselves. Lord knows I disdain helicopter parenting, but gee, what could go wrong there? And with all this newfound free time, why not make friends with some of the many liberated young moms? I mean, that's like cult leader 101 stuff. Indeed, that was the assumption by many newspapers, such as the New York Times, who right off the bat painted this as some elaborate ploy for Sinclair to collect mistresses. In fact, he accused many reporters of coming in disguise or posing as guests, and then going off to ridicule the colony because they had beans for lunch. And to be fair, Sinclair only took one mistress during the colony's short stint, introducing one of the colony's members to his wife Meta 2 months after beginning the experiment. When she delivered a big fat no to this proposition, Sinclair allegedly broke the whole thing off. Totally. Say what you will about the experiment as a whole, but there was no evidence that things had devolved into a free love bohemian debauchery. After all, this wasn't a hippie commune, it was a progressive commune. However, neither was it achieving the self-sufficiency that it had promised. It turns out that you only get, from each according to his ability, when one has such ability. And, oddly enough, there were few willing volunteers among the professional creatives to perform the necessary domestic drudgery they were ostensibly joining the cult colony to avoid. Imagine that. Thus, in order to cook meals and scrub floors, they were obliged to hire 15 workers. This caused some controversy among the members when their original plan to hire upper-class college kids failed to attract the right talent, and they were obliged to go with, quote, experienced servants. That is, people of lower socioeconomic status. In the spirit of the colony and to his credit, Sinclair offered these employees equal status as members and use of the facilities after their responsibilities were met, and provided they met the whole white non-Jewish criteria. Despite these disruptions, the commune actually churned along for several months. Sinclair, finding himself bogged down in drudgery of a different sort, now managing the colony instead of attending his writing, stepped down from the board of directors without issue. Worst cult leader ever. Disputes were typically resolved amicably, and none of the members left during this time. On the contrary, there was a sizable wait list by the time the colony closed down. Permanently. Which brings us to the evening of March 15th, 1907 would be the last for Helicon Home. At 4 in the morning on the 16th, a fire started. We don't know the specific details, only that it spread quickly. Despite there being no fire escapes, using ropes that had been suspended outside a number of upper floor windows some months prior, many of the residents were able to escape, albeit while losing all their belongings in the process. Despite some friction with their neighbors in the affluent area surrounding Helicon, many of them set aside their ill will in order to help the affected tenants. Thankfully, their quick reaction, and due to the speed of the fire, it had to be, all residents safely evacuated, except for one. Lester Briggs, a carpenter, lived on the 3rd floor. According to Sinclair, he had been drinking the night before. Plausible, but there is no way to corroborate this story. However, because there had now been a death, the authorities had cause to investigate the colony and make public inquests into many of the practices there. What they turned up was admittedly underwhelming. The Helicon managers had actually made some modest improvements to basic fire safety at the colony. A new boiler, fire extinguishers, the aforementioned escape ropes. The authorities had gone in with the intent of exposing a bohemian free love nest, and they didn't find that. While there were some low-level angsty nonsense, it's no worse than the sort of Karen-esque behavior you'd get in just about any neighborhood, and in the end, the whole thing was kind of ruled an accident and no charges were brought. However, in response to quiet insinuations that Sinclair had set the fire himself to collect insurance money, he replied that not only was that not the case, but Helicon residents had discovered dynamite in the basement 3 weeks earlier. Apparently. This was removed, but with no follow-up investigation or questions. I reckon this was the early 1900s. You could just buy this stuff at your local Home Depot when you were chewing tobacco and packing a Derringer. The point is, Sinclair discreetly implied, in a way to carefully skirt the boundary of libel, that the dynamite had been planted there, and the fire was actually the responsibility of steel and railway capitalists, whom he had been investigating. Plausible, certainly, but rather stinks of a legal Uno reversal card. In the end, there was no real evidence one way or another, and Sinclair was left holding the bag finance-wise. After getting their claim from the insurance company and selling off the land, all tenants were paid out, with the exception of Sinclair himself, who lost thousands of dollars over the whole thing. Realizing this would mean he'd have to resume his paternal responsibilities, he tried a few more times to make the whole commune thing work, in Delaware and Alabama, but eventually he settled on divorce instead. Today, the neighborhood consists of multi-million-dollar homes without so much as a plaque to mark the location of the high-minded, if ultimately flawed, experiment. As Sinclair put it, I have seen the future. I have known those wilder freedoms and opportunities that the future will grant to all men and women. Or alternatively, as Theodore Roosevelt said about Sinclair, perhaps he was just, quote, a crackpot, hysterical, unbalanced, and untruthful. Which version you subscribe to is ultimately just like your opinion, man, but it remains a significant piece of New Jersey history. That'll about do it for me. If you stuck with me this far, thank you so much for watching. Sources in the description, as usual. This has been Words and Coffee. Until next time.